So thanks a lot, Barrett, and welcome everyone to this, our third expert panel of the day. The theme is careers in STEM. My name is Nico. I'll be our moderator, and I'm very excited to get started. We have a fantastic group of panelists here today who pursued, as you'll see, a number of different careers in STEM. And we have about 45 minutes to get as much information, advice, and experience from their brains into all of ours. So without further ado, let's get started by just introducing our panelists. I'll work my way down the list, and maybe we can start with just a one-line summary of who you are and what you do. So let's start with Christina.
Hi, I'm a young professional. I've been working as a mechanical engineer for about 5 years now, and I live in Philadelphia, and I currently work on skyscrapers in New York, building facades for skyscrapers typically.
Wow, that's amazing. Leah, how about you next?
Hi, I'm Leah. I am a reporter at New Scientist magazine, writing about physics and space. My background is in physics, and I've been at New Scientist for about 3 years.
Great. Next, we have Anne Lapointe. Anne, can you hear us?
Oh, sorry, I had to get offline for a minute. I'm a chemist at Cornell, and I use robots to look at a lot of reactions at one time, and I use this information to develop new types of plastics that are better for the environment.
That's very exciting, thank you. And next we have Abigail.
Hi, I'm a material scientist at Air Force Research Labs, and I work on creating electronics in new form factors that work well for the Air Force.
Wonderful. And finally, we have Elizabeth Kellogg.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I'm an assistant professor at Cornell, and I use cryo-electron microscopy, which is a form of microscopy to study the molecular machines that keeps your cells running.
Wonderful. Okay, so as we have some questions stream in, I just have one to get us started. And I think that one reason that I'm particularly excited about this panel is that we have a group who have all done amazing things and are doing amazing things in STEM, but across a wide variety of career paths. And I think it's a great example of how a scientist can wear many hats, or how starting from even the smallest interest in STEM can lead to a number of exciting directions. So I think to get us started, I'll open this question to the whole group, which is, starting from this initial seed of interest in STEM, is there a particular moment or experience that led you to think, you know what, this is the career for me? And I'll just open it up to the whole group.
Sure, I'll go. So I actually went into college an English major, and I wanted to be a Shakespeare professor. I had a very specific view for what I wanted to do. And then I spent a lot of time speaking to my actual Shakespeare professor in college, who was a New Yorker, and I'm a Chicagoan. We're both sort of city kids. And I went to college in Northfield, Minnesota, which is a very small town in the middle of nowhere, and realized that if you become a professor, you kind of have to live wherever you get a job. And I had been sort of halfway in English and halfway in physics, and decided I did not in fact want to be a professor, and that you can do English stuff with a physics degree, but not the other way around. So I switched my major to physics, and off I went.
That's amazing, thank you.
I had a 6th grade science teacher, and I enjoyed doing things like Science Olympiad, and I loved math and science. And my 6th grade science teacher came up to me one day and she said, you know what, you need to be an engineer. And so she made it her mission to teach me all about engineering and science. And when I went into college, I knew I wanted to be a scientist or an engineer. So my 6th grade science teacher was definitely the one who influenced me.
It's a great role model.
Mm-hmm. I had a similar experience through high school. I had a math professor who was a mechanical engineer. I had a chemistry professor who was a chemical engineer. I had all come back to teach, and I knew I liked math and science, but I wasn't sure exactly where I wanted to go. So I told my mom I'm interested in engineering, and I started doing engineering summer camps. And that was really important because got to interact with local colleges and their departments, and then also go and see local engineering companies and do tours of the facilities and talk to actual engineers. So I went into college knowing that I wanted to be an engineer, and quickly decided to be mechanical engineer as well. And it was because of all the teachers who had inspired me, and the ability to go and see firsthand what industry engineers were doing.
When I was in high school, I had a lot of really good math and science teachers, and so I always enjoyed my math and science classes. But there wasn't really any one big incident that, you know, was the light bulb moment where I decided. But my chemistry teacher in high school really encouraged me. So when I went to college and they asked me to preliminary guess which major I might be interested in, I said chemistry. And then when I got there, we started with organic chemistry relatively early in the cycle in our freshman year, and I really enjoyed that. So I ended up sticking with chemistry.
I guess, so I wanted to be a doctor starting out. And when I started taking my science classes in undergraduate, in my undergraduate years, I really loved the research they were talking about. And then I also thought that perhaps if I contributed to discovery of new biology that would contribute to medical cures, I could help people more in that way.
Great. So it sounds like there's a wide range of sort of ages and stages and initial experiences that lead to sort of a career in STEM, which I think is an amazing takeaway for all of our audience members. So moving on, I have two questions here from Iwen, which I think pair together really nicely. And I think, Leah, I think I'd like to start with you on these, because I'd love to get your input as a journalist. And then also I think I can pass to the academics in the room, Elizabeth and Anne, to see your take on this initially too. But the questions are, in your opinion, what careers in STEM are the most popular? And similarly, do you think there are certain careers that are presently growing in popularity that might not be at the same level quite yet? So we'll start with Leah, and then we'll move to the rest of the group.
Okay, I don't know if I could say which careers are the most popular. I do get a lot of messages from like grad students in sciences saying, I don't want to do research anymore. Can I please be a journalist? Please help me. So I think that it really is very personal what sort of STEM career you want to go into. And I also think, to answer the second question, there are a lot of STEM careers that people don't think of as STEM careers. Like, I wanted to work for NASA for a very long time, and I still want to work for NASA. And you don't have to be an astronaut to work there. You don't even have to be an engineer. You know, NASA needs all kinds of, every single career you have to work at NASA. It's an enormous agency. And there's like, I know people who are space lawyers. That's the coolest career there is. But if you didn't know someone who did that, you wouldn't even think of it as a thing.
If I can just jump in and answer the question, I think that epidemiology and public health are going to be growing significantly in the next 5 years. And so I think that that's probably going to be something that's going to take off.
That's a great point. Very prudent, I think, for our current situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's definitely going to be the case with epidemiology. One thing I see in my subset is that a lot of people are very interested in nanotechnology and also in computer programming. And that's, you know, those are fields that are really were not nearly as big back when I was in college. The other thing that's popular now is science has become more interdisciplinary. And so you don't necessarily have people that say, I want to do this one very small subfield of chemistry. You get a lot more people who have interest in a wide range of areas.
Another thing I think that's been big recently is something called synthetic biology, or starting to make products using biological types of systems. And so that's something that's growing a lot that I've seen around the world.
Great, thank you for all the insight. So I think one thing, we've had actually a number of questions come up on this topic about adversity and sort of the process of gaining traction in STEM. And I think one thing we found sort of through this idea of coming from a number of different paths into STEM and a number of different paths throughout STEM, there are a lot of moments where you can sort of face adversity or get lost or not know exactly what you want to do and sort of have to find your way. And I think what a lot of the questions we're seeing now are asking is sort of what process did you go through to sort of answer those questions and sort of figure out in those moments of despair or uncertainty how to talk yourself and to keep going, to continue going. I think this would be a great question for Christina to start with, and then we can open up to the rest of the group. Sure.
As far as adversity and choosing career path and everything like that, when I first graduated from college, my first job was in heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. So I was working as a mechanical engineer. It was first job out of college, learning all of the different softwares and things like that. And I found out that I was working at a consultant engineering firm, which means that we were designing the systems, and then we were passing all of our designs and drawings off to other engineers and manufacturers who were building it and installing it. I found that the intangibility of the actual work that I was doing was really hard for me to conceptualize things without being able to touch and see them. So that was a challenge when I first started in the industry. And then the company went through a series of layoffs, and I was including in that. So it ended up being a really powerful moment for me, because it gave me an opportunity to decide where I wanted to go in my career. If that meant continuing in consultant engineering, continuing in heating and ventilation, or if it meant taking it in a completely different direction and doing some soul searching and figuring out what that meant for me. And so when I began applying for jobs, I decided I wanted something that was more tangible. So I got a job at the company New Hudson Facades, which is goes through all the phases of the manufacturing process. So they do design, manufacturing, and installation. So that was this big tangible component that I was missing in my first job. So now my office, if I was at my office, overlooked the manufacturing floor, so I could actually physically go down to the assembly lines and see how everything was coming together and see where the problems were. And it brought a whole nother dimension to my work, which was really important. And I realized that it was a much better fit for me. That was one big component of why this new job was a better fit for me. But it was important to move past the despair, I guess, the initial despair of losing employment, and realize that it was also an opportunity to redefine what I wanted in my career. I don't know if I answered the question, but.
No, that was fabulous. Thank you for the detailed insight. That was awesome. Good. Do any of our other panelists want to tackle that question, or I have one also lined up?
I'll tackle it.
Okay.
Sort of along the same lines of reevaluating what you want from your career. I was at a company for about 13 years, and it was a small startup company when I got there. And by the time it reached its peak, it employed around 700 or 800 people. And so as time went on and we became a bigger company, the focus evolved. And so they began doing more software and equipment rather than chemical research, which is what I was doing. And so I started having to think about what would I do for my next step. And I didn't make any moves, but I did do a few interviews and came to the realization that if I left that company, I would want to either stay in the area where I was living, which was the San Francisco area, or if I were to move, I wanted to move somewhere where I wanted to live, and it was also a really good job. And as Leah mentioned earlier, sometimes you're kind of limited to where you can live, and that's true even if you're not in academics. As a chemist in my particular field, one of the big areas that employs chemists is Texas, and I didn't really want to move to Texas. So I had to think in my mind, you know, where would I want to go? What would I want to do? And one thing I did like doing was working with students and doing basic research. And so I started thinking maybe I should look into getting back into working in a university setting. And when they did reorganize the company and lay off all of the research scientists, I already had that information in my brain, and that made the job search a lot easier than if I were starting from scratch.
I had, I'm sorry.
No, sorry, wait, the question is about overcoming adversity, is that it?
I think, yeah, I think that's sort of the high level idea, but also just sort of how you sort of wind your way through navigating, finding out, you know, which aspect of science or STEM you wanted to, you know, eventually make a career in. So it kind of blossomed into a broader question, but I think that's actually, you know, advantageous for our conversation.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, did you want to, I didn't mean to talk over
Oh,
you.
no. I reached a point where I had finished a postdoc, and I had actually stayed home for 2 years to raise part of my family. And when I went back, I went to the Air Force to start my job. And I had a background in a lot of different materials because I had moved around a lot. So because I had a broad background without a lot of depth in one area, when I started, they put me on a lot of contracts that were about a lot of different topics, like electronics or biology, or they were just so different that I didn't feel like I could do a good job at what I was doing and cover all of these different technologies. So I really didn't know what to do. I knew I didn't want to stay in just managing contracts. I missed doing research myself and having depth in an area. And I didn't really know what to do. There's almost too much opportunity at my job. So I ended up getting a mentor that I looked up to. And I just asked him, will you please be my mentor and help me figure out how to do this? And he kind of just gave me the confidence to start my own group and do my own research and to figure out what I wanted to do and say, that's okay, you don't have to ask permission. Go figure out what you want to do and go do it. And so that's what I've been doing now, and I love it, so.
That's awesome. And it seems like another thread we're kind of pulling out of this is mentorship and the impact of role models, which is actually something that's come up in some of the earlier panels as well. But moving forward, we have 2 questions from Margot, which I think we'll start with Leah on this one. The questions are, what is the hardest thing about your job? And subsequently, what is your favorite or the most rewarding part of your job?
Okay, yeah, I think the first part of that question sort of relates to the previous question, because for me, and I think for a lot of people, the hardest part about my job is that you have to be totally 100% comfortable sounding very stupid and getting a lot of help from other people. The way I got this job was I posted in a Women Science Writers Facebook group. I wrote this story. I think it's bad. I can't figure out why it's bad. Someone help me. And you know, a lot of this job is about constantly learning and getting better and being accurate. And that moves into the best part of the job because they're kind of the same, which is that every day I basically spend all day doing this, talking to experts about their field of study, about their life's work. And I get to ask a lot of smart people a lot of questions. And it's really just a blast. I love it.
That's great. Are there any other thoughts on the question, or we can move forward?
I guess I can answer. I mean, I think as being a professor, or faculty, much of my job is in teaching students, but also much of it is dealt in leading a research group and, you know, doing research in my lab. So I think probably I'm basically starting my second year, so I'm 1 year in. And I think what I couldn't have anticipated was the amount of being uncomfortable, I think, is just pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone constantly in all aspects of the job. So I think that's the hardest thing. But I think that it's an extremely rewarding job too, because I can answer, in my group, we answer all the kinds of questions that I've always wanted to tackle and the most important problems that I think are in my field. So I think that is very, very rewarding, and I get to work with great people.
Great.
I think one of the hardest things for me is there's so much failure involved in research. You don't know what the answer is, so you fail a lot in trying to get there. But then when you do succeed and you see your technology helping people or providing better medical care or something like that, it is very rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. And so I think we'll tap into now we have the benefit here of having researchers from both academia and from industry. So we have one question from Yana, which is, what is the difference between research in academia in an academic setting versus an industry? And is it easier to get into one versus the other?
I would say that the readout, I mean, so for academics, your metric for a finished product is a paper. So you are expected to answer questions and you don't have any sort of monetary aspect to that, you know. But in industry, my husband is an entrepreneur, so I'm not, but you know, I get to see that side too. And mostly they're driven by, is this product going to bring in revenue? So those are two very different ways of approaching projects.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You know, as a chemist who's worked both in industry and academics, I'm actually working on a lot of similar types of projects, but the difference is that in industry, you have a goal, you know, to make a certain type of product within a certain sort of number of limitations. And in academics, you want to know the question of why does this work, as well as how do I make it work better. And in industry, we were interested in those things too, but only in the context of making it better. We didn't have the luxury of going out and looking at the fine details of why it worked.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we have another question from Iwan here, which I think is, I guess it would be beneficial to know for any career, but I think within sort of a scientific career, maybe Christina, we can start with you. How do you balance your career with other things like family, friends, hobbies, and your health?
Yeah, it's important and something that I have good days and bad days with how it balances, depending on due dates as far as work due dates and time schedules there, or whatever else is going on in my family, if it's a holiday and things like that, and just finding time, remembering that there is life outside of work. So when you first of all, when you come home from work, being able to unplug from that, not check email or talk too much about it, you know, not still be working when you need to, when your body needs a rest and your brain needs a rest, and you need to interact with other people and talk to them about other things. My spouse is also in engineering. He's a computer engineer, and so we have similar jobs, but we don't really talk about work, and that's because we both want to de-stress a little bit. So we talk a lot about Star Wars and comic books, and you know, we try to enjoy as much, enjoy our time together and make the time together count, just so we do keep that balance, even though as far as hours, we spend a lot of them at work. So it's just about making the time that you do have with your family, making that meaningful, but also being able to unplug from work. And so that when you do go to work, you're refreshed and you're focused, and it's a healthier way to digest it, I guess. At least that's what I've found.
Great, thank you. That was an awesome insight. Would anyone else like to chip in?
I'll say that just like I understand that it is possible to balance these things in my career, but I absolutely do not, and I spend all my time working. But I have colleagues who have kids and families and hobbies and like human being stuff. And it's definitely all about personally drawing the line, because you can't expect your employers to tell you, hey, you should stop working now. If your employers would love if you worked 100% of the time, 24 hours a day, but you have to just understand your limits and understand that work can't be your whole entire life. And it's possible to just stop working and no one's going to be mad at you for it. I think it's the thing that I'm working on.
If I can jump in, I guess this is something I tell my students all the time. But I think that, what people have said is like, it's all about defining your own boundaries, but also there are times when more is not better. So sometimes working harder is not actually going to help you get any further. And the key is to realize when is that the time to, when is it time to work hard and when is it time to, take a step back and think about, what has happened and how to tackle the problem in maybe a different way, So I think that, I don't know if that's too vague.
No, I think that was an excellent point, and it actually transitions really nicely into our next question, which is largely centered around motivation. So I thought I would pair these two things together. So we had one question that came in about how do you stay motivated generally in your work? And then another question that came in with how do you engage in scientific things like research or engage in your job while we're also sort of quarantined or self-isolated or sheltering in place? And so I think these questions go together really nicely, because a lot of the things you do to stay motivated day to day are probably especially useful given our current climate and our current situation. And maybe we're asking ourselves questions like, should we be going along our day-to-day, like it is day-to-day, like it is our day-to-day life, given the circumstances? And so I think maybe Abigail, we can start with you, but I'd love to open this question up to the entire group about generally motivation, but especially motivation given these uncertain times.
I think the uncertain times caused us to do more research. So as soon as the pandemic happened, we have work that we do in decontaminating planes. So how do we pull people back from other countries that were US citizens in other countries? How do we fly them here? What if they are sick? How do we take them to a hospital and then clean the plane afterwards? That involves a lot of biology of how do I kill this virus, and how do I know that the next person on the plane is going to be okay? We look at how do I get medical equipment to people who need it, just the logistics of that. So when all of this happened, it actually was a lot more work for us. We still have research going on. I have things I'm working on in the garage at the same time, so I don't lose track of research, writing up papers. So I think a lot of our job with the Air Force is actually doing things that are related to things that happen in the world. So if disasters happen, that's when we have to step in and actually step up.
It's amazing, thank you. Would anyone else like to jump in, or we can move on to another question?
Sure, I could say a few things. So the company I work for, like I said, it has a manufacturing floor. So that's a whole nother challenge that my company has had to work with, as well as the construction sites. But as far as the engineering department, it's primarily a desk job. So a lot of our work was done on computers, and we did have to figure out how to cut back on our paper drawings and everything like that when we moved home. But we found solutions on how we can share documents virtually, kind of similar to like Google Docs and things like that, so that we can all work together. It's a very team-based environment as well. So it's motivating because we found all these new solutions, things that we can continue to work pretty much at the same pace that we were before, but knowing that everyone else is in the same solution and that we're all still working at a team, checking in every day, that's been a really good way to stay motivated, is that I'm not just doing this work for myself to keep my job or to meet a deadline. It's because we're all working as a team, and that we're trying to do this as best we can together, given the circumstances. We're not going to meet every deadline. There's going to be more. We've had a few technical difficulties with the software we use and things like that. But we're trying to stay positive about it and move forward as a team, working together to make sure everything works as best as we can.
Awesome, thank you.
I also think that in some sense motivation is sort of ephemeral. I already worked from home before this, so my day-to-day isn't particularly different, and motivation is something that comes and goes, but regardless of how motivated I feel, I do still have to do the work. So a lot of it is about learning how to just sit down and do the thing, even when you're not motivated, so that you can get back to whatever it is you actually want to do. Because I think a lot of lacking motivation is just like, I would rather do other stuff. And for me, a lot of motivation, like doing things while not motivated, is just like, I'm just gonna sit down, I'm gonna do the thing, and then the thing will be finished and I don't have to think about it anymore. And for me, and I think for a lot of people in my career who I've talked to, a lot of it is not about trying to feel motivated and trying to like pump yourself up. You just sit down and you do the thing.
I think it merits saying this, but I think this pandemic is pretty extraordinary. Last time we've seen anything like this was almost 100 years ago. So I would say that if you don't feel motivated, I wouldn't try to be kind to yourself in this time period, and almost certainly life is not going to go back to normal anytime soon. So this is going to be a paradigm changing event that's going to shape our society for the next couple of years at least. And so whatever you need to do to come to grips with that kind of adjustment in your life, do that and don't feel bad about it. So
that's a great.
If you don't feel motivated, don't feel bad.
That is a great point. Thank you. So again, I think that segues nicely into what I'll probably say is our second to last question as we get into the sort of the final 10 minutes. But that segues really nicely into not feeling bad about making a certain decision that may impact your career based on your interests. So one question that we've had come up a lot in the Q&A message board is, as you're sort of going through this process of understanding what it is that you do like, how do you know when it's okay to give up something that you don't necessarily like as much? Say you're in another job or you're engaged in another project that you sort of see as a temporary thing, but not a long-term interest. Sort of how do you make that choice between prioritizing what you think you will like versus what you're currently doing? And sorry, this is a question for the entire group.
I think my mom gave me really good advice on this, which is to remember that a career choice doesn't mean you're doing that career forever. And so my sort of mantra about the whole thing is I can do anything for 2 years. So if I had this job for 2 years and I hated it, then I would understand that it's time for me to find a new thing. So if you do something for a little while, it's not for you. I think it's important to just not feel bad about looking for something else. You want to spend your time in a way that you find fulfilling and enjoyable, and don't waste too much time worrying that you should have done something that you didn't enjoy and that wasn't the right path for you.
I struggled with this a lot, like I was saying earlier, with my first job, where it didn't click. It wasn't something that I was interested in. And And I think if I hadn't gotten laid off, I probably would have been there for a little bit longer, just because I was afraid of moving on to something new, that starting over basically, because the two jobs I've had have been in the same industry, but are vastly different as far as theory and knowledge and skills. So it was really scary to start something new. But I can't say that I regret it at all. I think I'm in a much better place professionally, and I know that I'm doing better work because I enjoy it more. So I'm learning faster, and I'm meeting challenges better, and coming in, in a better place mentally and emotionally for this job. And it has definitely impacted on how well I do at the job. So yeah, yes, change is scary, and making a step to change career paths or whatever, it can be really hard, and there's a lot of issues to weigh. But I agree, you can do it for 2 years, you try something new, and it might be better than you expect, or it might not be for you. But being able to take a chance is important too, just as like a way to grow as well.
I think in trying a lot of different things, I ended up learning not only what I liked, but also what I was good at. And so trying something for 2 years and learning, pushing through it, learning what you're good at and what you're not good at is always a good experience. And it has only helped me define further what I do want to do.
Great, thank you. So in the last 5 minutes here, I have one more question, which is, and this is again posed to the group. If you had the ability to go back in time and give one piece of advice to your 7th, 8th, or 9th grade self, knowing what you know now and experiencing the things you've experienced, what would that piece of advice be? Yeah, anyone can jump in when it's
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, mine will be short. I would tell myself to ask for what you need and don't apologize for asking for help. The sooner you do it, the better.
That's a really good one.
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna say, I never forget this piece of advice. The first boss I had, my first internship, my first engineering internship, said, and he actually, it was an anecdote of the owner of his first job told him. So it was this kind of trail of mentorship there. But he said, no one knows what they're doing. Like, even the people who run the company, there are moments where they have no idea what they're doing, and everyone is just meeting the next challenge. So it's just reminding yourself that whatever challenge you're facing right now, everyone is facing challenges, and it's okay not to know what you're doing, because that's the whole part of learning. At some point you have to meet something that you've never met before. So it's been really important to me to remember and remind myself that it's okay not to know, because everyone has moments like that. And yeah, I wish I knew that sooner also.
I think I would have told myself not to be afraid to dive deep into things that I was interested in, whether it was a subject matter in a class or a hobby or something. School was pretty easy for me, and I, did what I needed to do to get a good grade. And, I never really needed to go and figure out how to teach myself something. And it wasn't until I got to college that I needed that skill. And so the earlier you develop this ability to learn on your own and really dig into a subject, I think the better. And it's also fun.
I think to maybe sort of combine Anne's and Elizabeth's, I think I would probably tell myself to do things that are hard. I had sort of a similar experience of sort of coasting through and not working super hard, being bored all the time. And I think I would have benefited from learning earlier that doing things that are difficult and doing them because they're difficult, and asking for help and solving the problem is more fulfilling and lets you grow more, and it is just infinity times more interesting than sitting and being bored and complaining about it.
I think mine's very similar. It's sometimes I feel like I get paralyzed with the fear of failing, but instead of doing that, just go ahead and try it, and you will fail sometimes, but that's how you learn. So don't stop doing something because you're so afraid of it. Just go ahead and try it, ask for help, just like Elizabeth said, and you'll be super impressed with where you get.
Amazing. That was phenomenal advice all the way around, and I think a great way to sort of cap off this discussion. So before turning it over to Barrett, I just want to say thank you so much to all of our panelists. We have had, I think we've surfaced a number of insights here that will benefit not only the attendees, but us as the organizers as well. So thank you. I appreciate it very much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Great.
everyone
Thanks.
so much for joining us. We're so thankful for everything that you've shared.